particularly grateful to our allies and partners from the Middle East, the Gulf states, particularly in Jordan, coming here to talk about a number of critical issues right now. Iraq, obviously, is one of the predominant ones. The move of ISIL concerns every single country here. But in addition to that, we have an ongoing crisis in Syria, where ISIL is also involved, and we have the challenge of an Iranian nuclear program, coupled with a number of other Middle East, the peace process, and so forth. So we have a lot to talk about. We couldn't have stronger partners in this effort. I'm very grateful to everybody for taking the time to come.
Well, there can be no greater macabre political theater than what is transpiring currently inside that land known as the Beltway. For Washington is a tinderbox at the moment and on high explosive alert. A Speaker of the House going legal on the president finally calls for a legal third party to get to the bottom of the IRS disaster, printing cash for Syrian rebels, and oh yeah, that immigration thing. Let us dig in. Welcome back to MidPoint. Washington correspondent for the Talk Radio News Service hails from the left. Justin Duckham joins us. And the contributing editor for Blog Her Politics and News, hailing from the right, Erica Holloway, joins us. Thank you both for joining us. Erica, I'm going to get to you first this time because we just talked a little bit on the other segment with Justin. We heard from a young lady who was in charge of a group or involved in a group near Laredo, Texas, that is forming a human chain of American patriots, they call themselves, to stop immigration. They could not tell us whether or not they are armed. We are going to assume that they are. And there's some angry people there. Your first reaction when you hear that this is the sort of thing now that some American citizens are taking into their own hands regarding the immigration crisis?
Well, I would hope people wouldn't be vigilantes and allow law enforcement to do their jobs down there. And I understand that people are frustrated, especially on the border where there's a lot of border violence. So that's certainly something that I can understand, of being here from Texas myself. But I would hope that people would be safe and they wouldn't do something like that. It can be very dangerous down there. We've seen an increase in violence over the border. And so I certainly wouldn't endorse that sort of action.
But you would have to say that in light of a lot of the passions in this country, that this was almost inevitable?
We've seen things like this in the recent past. In California, there was similar circumstances out there down at the border, people hanging out down by the fence. Standing vigil, as they were saying, and trying to protect the border. But it's not a good idea. I certainly think that we have some resources in this country that do the right thing, the best they can to protect the people. But sitting out outside of the border, probably not as wise as making sure that the people that are supposed to be doing their jobs are doing that.
Let's go ahead and shift up now and talk about what President Obama has done with regard to Syria. We heard John Kerry talking a little bit more about what's going on in the Middle East. Justin, I'm going to start with you on this right now. The president is talking about $500 million of American taxpayer money to help the Syrian rebels. I have to tell you that there are a lot of people already saying, have we not learned our lesson? We're going in and we're going to arm and we're going to throw money again at a certain group, and we're going to hope that they get us out of this mess. Your reaction?
Well, of course, the obvious fear is blowback whenever we see any situations like this. We, as you mentioned, have learned in the past that arming rebels is not necessarily the best idea in American interest in the long term. But I think this really highlights probably one of the bigger problems for the administration. I am speaking from the left, but I am frustrated by a lot of these foreign policy initiatives put forward by Obama, simply because there doesn't really seem to be any sort of doctrine behind this. If anything, this is sort of an ad hoc approach wherein we've sort of unilaterally decided some rebels are okay, others are not, and some protests are legitimate, others, such as what's going on in Iraq right now, are not as well. And it's really hard to necessarily understand what sort of pattern is going on here and what exactly this is going to come back to in terms of the U.S. national security interests.
By the way, either one of you can jump in at any time, so let me go ahead and throw this one now to you here, Erica. The same thing here. Foreign policy experts are saying basically the containment in Syria simply hasn't worked. We got caught off guard and caught flat-footed with ISIS. There are people angry now about spending more money and sending more money overseas.
John Boehner said that the president was taking a nap on foreign policy. I think that would imply that there was some deliberate action here. I think that he's really fallen down in his foreign policy. And the larger question here is, why is it that he now wants to do this after he's receded our fronts in Syria and Iraq and largely in the Middle East and even Eastern Europe, I would venture. that just weakens us. And we've been known around the world as a smart, listen to your people on the boots on the ground sort of country. And this just smacks of walking back his decisions lately of foreign policy that have been largely misguided. And so now he's trying to double back and do something about it after he's actually caused a lot of this strife.
It's just that discussion again. You said we've been seen as smart. Are we?
Smart, not recently.
Well, that's just it. Justin, you'd have to agree,
recently.
too. We're not really very smart. At least the rest of the world is going to look at us right now and saying, where's the American smarts supposed to be in all this?
Well, and he was warned about doing these sorts of actions, these bold declarations of pulling people out of areas where we still had a tenuous grasp on the situation. And he was warned that this would happen. And in fact, in so many ways, people were just astounded that the writing was so clearly on the wall. And yet he went forward with it anyway. And, his agenda now, nationally here at home is dead. So this is really the last gasping breaths of his poor performance as a president.
Gasping breath. Do you want to throw in on that, Justin?
Well, this is pretty much a response to the will of the American people right now. For a long time, we've been pretty war weary and therefore reluctant to commit to some major involvements. And this is probably just what we're going to have to expect from here on out. This is essentially what we've been asking for, which is a more limited approach, perhaps arming, perhaps drone use and whatnot, but not sort of those big actions that really draws a lot of attention internationally beyond just the countries that are immediately involved in this. So as long as we have that sort of mentality among the American people, this is going to be the future of American foreign policy.
But we're getting involved again with a group that might be involved with ISIS. When you talk about the Syrian rebels, there could be a connection there. At the end of the day, we could be arming the same people that we're worried about in Iraq.
And that's very true. And you really have to wonder, is that really the goal of this? Is this really about, sort of trying to provide stability for the Maliki government? If that is it, how come we're not going through other means to ensure that it's maybe a more perhaps open and sane government? Or is this more about trying to negate the influence of Iran, which I think would be an argument that the American people would probably buy into as well, but has not been openly talked about nearly as much?
We mentioned the Speaker of the House a couple of moments ago threatening a lawsuit against the President of the United States. Justin, I'll let you go with this one first because there are people saying smart move has to be done. There is some saying this is simply nothing more than political theater.
Well, it is political theater, but it's political theater for a pretty good cause for Speaker Boehner if he wants to get anything done. For a long time, he's been less than effective for rallying his troops. We know a lot of his sort of, sticks and carrots were taken away once the idea of using committee assignments was sort of shot down, or allocating funds to certain districts. So now to sort of placate a lot of the more conservative wings of the party, he has to do movements like these, wherein he'll take on one of their pet issues, which I guess in this case would be the executive branch overreach, in their minds at least. And he's also using campaign funds now to try to solidify his support. So this is the same kind of old-fashioned Washington trickery, but with just a new face. And it's sort of telling that this is the middle of the road approach. This is not flat on impeachment. This is just sort of a cosmetic lawsuit.
Looks like they're talking about executive overreach, Erica, and that certainly is something the Supreme Court talked about with the president this week.
They did, and he did slap him down. And I'm going to disagree with Justin on the opposite side. I'm going to say I don't think it's a smart move. The Chamber of Commerce wing of the Republican Party constantly touts the abhorrence of the judicial system stepping over the boundaries of the legislative branches and the executive branches, and this is exactly what John Boehner is doing. So I think that it actually is more kabuki theater that plays into more of a liberal agenda and makes the Republicans look foolish and makes them retreat from the things that we say that we don't agree with. And things like tort reform have less of a bite if you're taking the president to court.
About a minute 20 here. Let's go ahead. I got to switch you over here with short time left. Talk about the IRS, possibility of a special prosecutor getting involved here. Guys, can we all agree here that something's gone wrong and we've got to look and find out what's gone on here? Because frankly, Justin, even you, if you're sitting on the left, can't say that there's nothing to see here.
No, I can't. I mean, there are obvious red flags. Whenever you see missing emails, you get sort of notions of Nixon. And the fact that the administration thinks that people aren't going to care about the IRS, which has been the government boogeyman of all government boogeymen for decades and decades and decades, is a little bit ludicrous. And they've, certainly fallen behind in this story and let other people paint a very incriminating picture for them.
20 seconds, Erica, your turn.
I would say that we need to teach people in Washington how computers and the internet work.
Wait a minute. Let's stop right there. You're now going to tell us that we need to educate the people in Washington to do something that brings them into the 21st century. Erica, how dare you? Please don't go there.
Crashed and all my emails are magically gone.
Stop making sense. It's nothing you need to do here. It's the worst thing to do. Erica Holloway from Blogger Politics and News, Justin Duckham as well. Thank you both for joining us. We'll have you back. We'll do it again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we really want to think about common sense? Well, it's a nice place to start, at least. All right, if we're going to go ahead, let's try to at least bring a little common sense into this. All right, coming up a little bit later on, right here on this hour of MidPoint, my answer to every single person who is whining about America not caring about soccer. We've heard this all the last 24 to 48 hours. Let's go ahead and deal with it. Heads up, and we will. Because here on MidPoint, every single day, we question everything.